Well, nice to see everyone here, and what a joy to be here. And as many of you know, about 2 weeks ago, the Ananda India monastery shifted from Pune city, and we're living now in a couple of houses in Kandala, where we sort of have a hermitage monastery as Swami Kriyananda really desired for Ananda monks for many, many years. And one of the things he often said, and especially in this context, he said he wanted this particular way of life when the timing is right. And it's sort of become my mantra lately, because you'll find that there are many good things that we can do, but sometimes it's just when the timing is right. And the timing is right for a new center here in Mumbai. A lot of timing is right now. There's just a lot of energy and grace coming. And it's just a joy for all of us to be much closer to Mumbai. We're only about 2 hour plus drive away, and we'll be coming here more often over the coming months and years. One of the things about monks renouncing family life and giving their lives in seva, service, sadhana, and meditation, Yogananda ji once said that in order to justify renouncing family life, you must take on an even larger family. It's the only way that you can justify it. And so what we are doing there is really for all of you, for all of the world. It's not just for us. And in fact, many of the experiments that we'll be doing in renunciation and sadhana and service will be shared with you over the coming weeks and months and years. Because again, this is not just for us. There's an attitude that I have found really helpful over the years, and it comes from what I just said, that Yogananda ji said that we can only justify renunciation of this type when we take on a larger family, which is, I see all of us, myself especially, but all of us monks, as your servants. We're here to serve you and to share with you what we grow in understanding and experiment with, because we're doing a great experiment in renunciation, and we'll get to try many different things that will also help everybody here, because what Swami Kriyananda ji gave was ego renunciation. And it's not about outward lifestyle. In fact, Yogananda ji said that in the autobiography of a yogi, that the householder path is indeed the higher path, if you can do it with non-attachment. And so we're all, in a way, in this together. It's just that we can specialize in certain aspects of it and share it with others, share it with yourself. I'll read what Swamiji says about ego renunciation, and this is what we'll be talking about today. Freedom from anger, hate, pride, and desire is more important than renunciation of outer material involvements. It must be understood further that non-attachment itself is not the goal of renunciation, the supreme purpose of which is to give one the freedom to devote himself primarily to his spiritual search. The real delusion to be overcome is the bondage of ego identity. The true goal of renunciation is to help one to rid himself of that self-limiting identity. Generally speaking, in India, judging by my own observation, the goal of spiritual striving does not seem to have been transcendence of the ego. Many renunciates, no doubt sincere in their disclaimers of attachment to money, place, possession, and position, still place great emphasis on their own authority, especially in spiritual matters. And this is not uncommon among people who renounce outwardly only, is that they actually affirm the ego by affirming spiritual pride. Swamiji tells the story of a hermit, and many of us have heard this story. He writes about it in the Nayaswami order book that he wrote. And there was a hermit who was a very good hermit, did a lot of sadhana, did a lot of meditation, was very focused, and developed a lot of spiritual power, but also a lot of spiritual pride. And one day he was meditating, and there was a crow cawing and disturbing his meditation. And he got very angry, and he just his own negative anger and thoughts towards that crow. The crow caught on fire and turned to ashes. And the saintly hermit, he wasn't a saint yet, he just ignored it and got back to sadhana, grateful that he had shut up this loud crow. And at that point, a deva, an angel, appeared to the hermit, which shows that he did have some spiritual advancement. And this deva came to him and said, "You really have a lot of spiritual pride. You have so much to learn." and I want you to go and learn from this person. And the hermit recognized that this was a great deva that was trying to help him, and a great blessing. And this deva said, I want you to go to this address in this village, and you'll find a woman there. And the hermit was like, a woman? What are you talking about? I'm going to learn from a woman in this village? And the deva, he respected the deva, so he went and found this village, found the address, and also was just dismayed to see that it was just a very poor area. And he finally knocked on the door, and this woman answered, and he said, I'm here to learn from you. And the woman, he was very haughty about it, because that's the way he was. And the woman said, I'm not your crow that you can turn me to ashes. Go away and come back when I'm finished serving my husband. And the hermit was humbled by this. And he went back home, started doing his hermit thing again. And as he was meditating again, still there was some pride, because the deva came to him again and said, you still have something to learn. And so Deva said, go to this village, find this man at this address. You have a lot to learn from him. And so he went to this other village, went down these alleys and lanes, and it turns out the address that he was at was the neighborhood of butchers and leather workers, which was way, way, way below his own caste. And again, pride of pedigree came, but he swallowed his pride and he went and knocked on the door, and a young boy answered. And this was the person he was to learn from, someone who was also younger than him. And the hermit said, I'm here to learn from you. And the young boy said, you're going to have to wait. I'm here serving my parents, and I must do my duty. He was very calm about it, and he went away and served his parents. And the hermit understood that we must serve others, not out of obligation, not out of pride of pedigree, but simply because God wants us to serve, and to do it calmly and dispassionately and lovingly and graciously. And so this really, Swamiji tells this story because he says that renunciation has nothing to do with our lifestyle, where we are, where we live in the world. It has to do with offering the little self into the infinite self. And it's a very positive thing. When ego renunciation makes us cringe or think in terms of negativity or any resistance, it's because we, one, either don't have a true understanding of what it means, because it's such a positive, glorious, devotional, positive, blissful thing, or we don't really, or we have resistance in some way in terms of likes and dislikes. And so I'm going to read what Swamiji wrote about the marks of a true renunciate. This is what we were working on this week with our monks in Kandala. In his book on the Nayaswami order, Swamiji writes about the marks of a true renunciate. And from the Gita first, he says that renunciation of ego is the final message of the Gita and the most important one. He says it is fitting that Arjuna's first question in the final chapter of the Gita is about renouncing the ego. And in that chapter, 18, stanza 10, Krishna says, one who is wise in his renunciation is ever calm in himself and is never doubtful. He has no aversion to unpleasant actions, nor is he attached to pleasant ones. And Swamiji writes, it is interesting that Krishna associates calm renunciation with freedom from doubt. In fact, doubts arise, obviously so, from uncertainty, and uncertainty arises from at least some degree of attachment. And most importantly, where there is truly no attachment, one no longer questions whether he likes or doesn't like what he has to do. He simply does it. And we'll go on and talk about how one simply does it. And my own life is interesting because I do a lot of traveling. In the first 6 months of the year, I slept in my own bed on 2 weekends. Every single other weekend I was traveling somewhere all over India. And people often ask me, oh, you must like traveling. And I just have to say, I used to say, I just cannot stand traveling. I would just like to be at home all the time and have a simple life and be in one place. But even that's the wrong answer, to say that I'm traveling even though I can't stand traveling, because that's a dislike. And it creates resistance. And when there's resistance in our life, it drags on our energy. When there's resistance, there's friction. And friction causes heat, it causes grating of sand in the gears and it slows us down. It slows down the flow of energy. And so true renunciation is just simply not only doing our duty, but doing it joyfully without this thought of, well, I'm doing this even though I don't like doing it. Because that not liking creates, again, it's attachment that's still there. And as long as we still have attachment of likes or dislikes, we still have a ways to go. And so we are all working on this together. Now, Swamiji writes about the marks of a true renunciate, and there's 14 of them. And I'll go over most of these. Number 1, they have no or very few attachments or desires. And then Swamiji writes, one can remain married and carry on business responsibilities if, as Master puts it in Autobiography of a Yogi, the yogi maintaining a mental uninvolvement with egotistic desires plays his part as a willing instrument of God. And he says the yogi, not the renunciate, not the monk. We are all yogis here. Such a true yogi may remain dutifully in the world. There he is like butter on water, and not like the easily diluted milk of unchurned and undisciplined humanity. And so this yoga, this renunciation that Master gave us, is for all of us, and exactly right where each one of you is right now. And that's the beauty of what Master gave us. He didn't say you have to go somewhere to do this. He said you can do this where God put you, right here and right now. And in fact, I have seen that where God puts us when we come onto the spiritual path, because people sometimes think, oh, I wish I had read Autobiography of a Yogi when I was younger, before I got responsibilities and career and family and all these things. And in fact, I think our guru tricked all of us, and most of us, and got us involved in these things before he brought us consciously onto the spiritual path, because he knew that we needed to get going in this direction, because we had to be placed in just the right place, the perfect place for you, me, each one of us, to find God and to practice renunciation and get on with it right where we are right now. Number 2, they are without anger, the true renunciate. Anger appears in the heart when one's desires are thwarted. And so this is the teaching of the Gita, that from thwarted desires arise anger and aggravation and all these things. And so as long as there's irritation and anger, look for the reason. And the reason's not because of that person out there who's pushing our buttons. The reason is because we have buttons to push. And so we just need to work on this thing that's in ourselves that reacts with anger, irritation, frustration. And don't blame it on anyone else, and don't blame it on ourselves either. It's not like we should get down on ourselves, but we should introspect and see, okay, why am I reacting? And what is there inside of me? Number 3, they accept without prejudice whatever life gives them and live by the principle, what comes of itself, let it come. For they never seek to justify or defend themselves, but accept all judgment by others dispassionately as experiences given them by God for their own higher good. And again, if you find yourself reacting emotionally to something someone says about you, as Yogananda says, if there's a diseased tooth in the mouth, it hurts. And that pain is because there's something wrong there. And so if you find yourself reacting, look for the cause of it inside of yourself. Again, without judging or getting down on yourself. They keep in their hearts primarily the company of God. Again, all of these things, the marks of a true renunciate, none of them that Swamiji writes about has to do with our possessions, our job, where we live, how we live, whether we have a family, any of these things. It's all about what's in here. And this is perhaps the most important. They always keep the company of God. 6, they are indifferent to others' opinions of them. This one is very important because so much of modern society is about winning praise, adulation of others, and just simply do God's will. I have found that when you step into positions of leadership in any world, including Ananda Sangha, you will get heaps of praise and heaps of blame at times. And you just have to accept these as just sailing in one ear, as they say, and out the other, and just not stopping anywhere inside the head. They work without personal motive to please God alone. And Swamiji says about this, renunciation is not an end in itself, but a means towards an end of finding God and serving Him in His children. And this is the positive aspect of renunciation, which is find a way of serving God's children wherever you are, your family, your business life, your friends, Ananda Sangha. Everything is an opportunity to do this. I saw this with Swami Kriyananda, that he was really, truly remarkable, that he would make friends everywhere he went. Complete strangers, he would go up to them, start talking to them, start giving to them, try to help them. He did see everyone equally as a child of God. And again, I think he really saw himself as the servant of all, and try to have this attitude that we're trying to serve the God, the divinity in others. There's a chant of Yoganandaji's which has sort of become my mantra lately, just the one phrase in it, which he says, take the dust of each one's feet, serving Mother where she sleeps. And just try to relate to others, even when that divinity is sound asleep and they're very deeply in delusion. Try to look for it and try to awaken it and try to encourage it. And we can't always do this with some people who are too far asleep, but you'd be surprised at how often you can do this. By just looking for that divinity, recognizing it, just looking at it and recognizing it awakens it. Swamiji wrote an article that was very interesting. I shared it in a blog I wrote about this photo that I took once of Swami Kriyanandaji. And he said that as a photographer, he found that a photographer, when they take a photo of a flower or a scene or a person, that if they love what it is they're photographing, he said that that flower or that animal or object actually wakes up even more and expresses the appreciation consciously of being loved and looks better. The flower looks better, the scene looks better, the person looks brighter, because this essentially is what the saints do regularly, but really that we can all do, just by recognizing, appreciating, and loving the divine in others. That by itself awakens that divinity in others, and it starts to become more and more awake. So practice this as a conscious act in the family that you're serving, in the people you're serving, and in all of us here, each other. Number 8, they are impersonal in the sense of wanting nothing for themselves, but never in the sense of being indifferent to the needs of others. And Swamiji has talked many times about people who are jnana yogis who say, all is God, all is Ram, and all pain and all suffering, all is Ram, and especially when other people suffer. But then when they suffer and someone pokes them with a stick, rather than saying all is Ram, they say, ouch, that hurts, oh, don't do that to me. And so we have to be indifferent to the pain and the pokes and the prods and the insults that people give us, but we must not be indifferent to the needs of others. And I was talking, my twin brother is also on this path, and we have a shared mutual annoyance, which we both see this world as Divine Mother's dream in our lives, and just it's her dream, and she's in charge of it, and if whatever happens to us is just exactly what she wants for us and is perfect for us. And that's a good attitude to have, but you don't want to apply it to others, because you'll find that when you see somebody suffering and they need help, they need compassion, they need kindness, to just say, oh, it's just a dream in the middle of their extreme pain and suffering, it's belittling, insulting, and in fact it's not very helpful. Towards ourselves, yes, it's good. So this is what Swamiji says, be impersonal towards ourselves, but not indifferent to the needs, the pains, the suffering of others. 9, they see all beings as striving toward the attainment of Satchidananda, ever existing, ever conscious, ever new bliss, no matter how presently misguided the efforts of some people may be. Thus they feel kinship with everyone and with all life. And just it helps to recognize that when you see somebody who's misguided, who's in delusion, be very, very, very sure that we have probably done the same thing in some past lifetime. No matter how strange it may seem, probably we've overcome it in a past lifetime, but have compassion rather than judgment, is what Swamiji is saying. They accept nothing as their own, but only as being on loan to them for the benefit of others. This is one of the strange things about Ananda renunciation for the monks, because at Ananda village, we don't have a traditional monastery. All the monks have jobs where they actually go out from the monastery during the day and work. And if you go to the monastery at Ananda village, you'll see this long row of like 10 cars. And these are all the monks' cars. Every monk has their own car because they're all going out and serving somewhere. And it's not that they're bound by all this attachment and possessions. They see this car as God's vehicle to take them to serve. And you can almost see it as Krishna had a chariot, he had a car. Arjuna had a car, he had a chariot. And the purpose of it was to serve. And for many years at Ananda, I've had a car, and it's taken me everywhere. And our car is just this beloved creature that has a name and a consciousness. And it's our vehicle to take us, just like our body is a vehicle to take us. And we want to appreciate and respect and honor the fact that these things are given by God to help us. And by renouncing these things outwardly, actually we can serve God less. And it really, in a way, it's contractive rather than expansive. They view pleasure and pain equally as opposite or dual expressions of eternal divine bliss. This is one of the most important ones. And again, we don't want to apply this to others. We want to apply all these things to ourselves. It's one of the great teachings of a friend of mine at Ananda, Nayaswami Anandi. She said that a great lesson for her was one day she was hearing a Sunday satsang and hearing a teaching, and she caught herself thinking, oh, that person over there, if they only heard this and got this message and got this lesson. And she realized, this is a big mistake, that I should only be applying these things to myself. I shouldn't be pointing around looking how others should be learning these lessons. I should really only be applying these teachings to myself and help others when I can, but not be thinking too much about others, their need to learn these lessons, but only my own. They have meditated daily for years, which is straightforward and simple. I think 2 years counts as years, so I think most of us have been doing that. Because they are always happy in themselves, they are impervious to insults, outer suffering, failure, defeat, or disaster. They strive to live the ideal that Paramhansa Yogananda voiced when he said, "You should be able to stand unshaken amidst the crash of breaking worlds." And this whole thing of being impervious to insults and threats and all these things, it takes time. And just be patient with yourself. It's taken me many years. I'm still working on it. But every once in a while you see signs of progress. I saw one recently for myself that it didn't make me proud, but I was very joyful about it. I was applying for a renewal of my visa. And in Pune, it's the police officers who actually take these applications. And I just filled out some piece of paperwork incorrectly. And this police officer didn't like what I had done. And he looked at me and he said, "We can file charges against you for this." And he was being bullying and threatening to me. And I had to laugh joyfully that someone would threaten a child like me. I felt like someone was threatening a 5-year-old child with arrest and prison and jail, and I just laughed and laughed and laughed. And I didn't outwardly laugh because it probably would have really, really irritated him even more. But I just smiled calmly and nodded and accepted what he said and thanked him and moved on from that. And in fact, if I had reacted negatively, as we have all learned many, many times, it just makes the situation worse. And I think sometimes these are tests of God, just to see where we're at. And if we react negatively and make it worse, it's almost a gift of God to help us to see that, yes, we still have this thing to work on. So when we do make things worse and react, be grateful even for that in the lesson that we learned from that. And finally, number 14, they strive to love God unceasingly and ever more deeply in a spirit of utter openness to be guided by His will. And Swamiji again comes back to this very positive aspect of renunciation, that it's completely positive. There's nothing limiting, negative. There is no loss at all. It's only gain and expansion and receiving much, much, much more. And Swamiji writes, renunciation as such, talking about outward renunciation, is only the negative side. It is not a goal in itself. It simply means giving up one thing in order to free ourselves to grasp another, something infinitely better. The positive side is devotion and the liberating techniques, meaning that the positive side of renunciation, devotion is a form of renunciation because we are offering our little self into the light of God with complete love and self-offering. And the techniques, you can see that as a positive form of renunciation, actively doing something as a service to God, as a way and a means of becoming free. We see then that worldly life and renunciation are not to be defined by where we live, but by how we live, inwardly as well as outwardly. As our beloved master used to say, you can go to the jungles and live like a hermit, but if you take your desires with you, you are not escaping from them. You have to take yourself along wherever you go with all your tendencies. I've shared this before, but when I first came onto the spiritual path, I had this really strong inclination to be a hermit. And so I went up into the mountains of California, far and far away from anybody. I would not see anybody for weeks and weeks at a time, living in the mountains, lying under the stars at night. But the problem was that no matter how far away I went, this irritable, restless fellow Devarshi was always tagging along and chattering away in my mind and annoying me and causing me troubles. And so it's really not the things that we need to escape from. It is our attachments and desires. So renunciation must be within. It must be of the heart. The seeds of tendencies must be burned in the fires of meditation. So Master gave this spirit of renunciation for all of us, and he gave it as an entirely positive, joyful, devotional act. And when you do it in this spirit, and I just would recommend reading this Nayaswami order book. It's online, all of it. It's at nayaswami.org. But also the other book, Sadhu Beware, which talks about ways of introspecting and overcoming attachment to the ego and being what Swamiji calls an ego detective. Because these things really are for all of us, and they're a necessity for all of us. The only way that we can become free, and I'll talk about this more and how to become a Jivan Mukta in this lifetime in our class this afternoon, which is a ridiculous title for a class if you think about it, how to become a Jivan Mukta in this lifetime. But it's one of my favorite topics because that's exactly what Master wanted. But if you were to put this on a billboard, how to become a Jivan Mukta in this lifetime, many people would think that we were ridiculous. But it's exactly what Master promised us, wanted for us, and said that we should hope for. And this whole idea of positive renunciation is really a huge central part of it. So may their blessings be with all of us, with our new monastery in Kandala, how we can share with all of you as we come here again and again, but also with all of our efforts towards finding God in this lifetime and completely relinquishing the ego in this beautiful act of devotional self-offering. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.